The Diary of Dr. X, Episode 24, Nutrient Pollution. I spoke to you not so long ago about food pollution. In that episode, I mentioned in passing that some of the original pesticides used in industrial agriculture were known POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. Pesticides are used to destroy insects, weeds, or diseases which can affect food crops. The more appropriate name, as Rachel Carson suggested, is biocides. Life killers, in other words. Well, sorry to say, biocides aren't the only problematic chemicals used in the agricultural sector. Far from it. There is also the question of nutrient pollution. When lecturing on this topic, this would be the second in my series on products as pollution. The information below is drawn mostly from 3 articles from the World Watch Institute published by Chris Bright, Payal Sampat, and Danielle Nierenberg between 1999 and 2001. As you can see, the problem is nothing new by the dates. In fact, the problems began to appear only a few decades after artificial fertilizers were first introduced into the market shortly after World War II. The detrimental effects of artificial fertilizers in the agricultural sector are well documented and widespread. Combined with nutrients from concentrated sewage, from human and animal sources, and nitrogen oxides released by the burning of fossil fuels, the use of artificial fertilizers in industrial agriculture contributes to nutrient pollution, which is fast becoming a global problem as industrial agricultural methods are promoted in areas formerly using traditional farming methods in their food production sector. This type of pollution is known as non-point source pollution in the literature. This means it is not coming from any particular factory or any specific source, but is a general environmental contaminant. The most common compounds used as artificial fertilizers in the agricultural sector are nitrogen and phosphorus compounds, both of which provide nutrients used by plants. On grain farms, these artificial fertilizers are usually applied either in the form of tiny solid pellets when fields are seeded or in the form of anhydrous ammonia before planting. I had a job filling anhydrous ammonia tanks when I was a kid working on the farm, actually. What is happening is that through using large amounts of artificial fertilizers, we are changing the nitrogen cycle, through which nitrogen and nitrogen compounds naturally cycle between soils, plants, and the atmosphere. The combination of artificial fertilizers, concentrated sewage, and fossil fuel use is raising general nutrient levels beyond their natural levels in nature, or beyond their optimum range. Forgot I didn't have to light this. This is especially true when there are heavy rains in spring, before the crops begin to grow and use up the nutrients in the fields. And this is a predictable process, virtually inevitable and unavoidable, so long as unnaturally high levels of nutrients are continually added to the environment on an annual basis to promote the more rapid growth of food crops. That is, in order to force them to grow faster than they do under natural conditions. There are a number of ecological effects resulting from excess nutrients. Firstly, there is the effects on non-target or non-agricultural vegetation. Just as too few nutrients are bad for plants and limit their ability to grow, too much is also detrimental. Optimum, remember. Particularly to trees and other woody plants. As Payat suggests, too many nutrients actually weakens the immune system of plants, making them more vulnerable to pests and disease. The immune systems of plants are very different from those of animals, being based upon the production of a number of chemicals to neutralize toxins and disease instead of killer cells and antibodies as in mammals or animals. Excess nutrients interfere with the natural production of these chemicals and, as Chris Bright describes it, can lead to, and I quote, a kind of botanical equivalent of AIDS. Excess nutrients can also reduce cold hardiness in some species and restrict the uptake of water and soil nutrients in others. Secondly, there are human health effects. These are largely due to the contamination of groundwater or other drinking water with elevated levels of nitrates. According to Nierenberg, this can lead to both elevated risks of miscarriage for pregnant women and to blue baby syndrome, also known as methemoglobinemia. There's a mouthful for you. Blue baby syndrome results from the fact that human infants' digestive systems convert nitrate to nitrite. The problem is that nitrite blocks the blood's oxygen carrying capacity. The result is suffocation and death, hence blue babies and dead ones. Ruminant livestock, such as cattle, sheep, and goats, whose digestive systems behave in a similar way, are also vulnerable. Sampat points out that over 3,000 human babies have died from blue baby syndrome worldwide since 1945, when artificial fertilizers were introduced. Usually, when the babies start dying, you can expect some action. But sorry, not in this case. So, finally, the most prevalent effect of nutrient pollution is upon surface water and the species which inhabit it. There are two basic consequences of unnaturally high nutrient levels in this case. The first is the promotion of red tide organisms. These are toxic forms of algae in the ocean or other water bodies. Being a type of plant, excess nutrients can lead to an explosive growth in the population of such species to the extent that their toxins lead to fish kills. The second is the promotion of what is called eutrophication events, which can lead to fish kills as well. Besides red tide organisms just mentioned, nutrient pollution also promotes the growth of algae in general. Algae, after all, are merely microscopic forms of single-cellular plant life, which live in bodies of water, and they respond to the increase in nutrients in the same way that a crop of wheat or corn does, by growing more quickly. Eutrophication happens in two stages. First, increased nutrient levels cause an explosive growth of algae in bodies of water. Second, as these unnaturally high populations of algae die and begin to decay, their decay consumes all of the oxygen content in the water, killing fish and all other oxygen-dependent species in that area. The process is rather paradoxical, since plants give off oxygen, right, and absorb carbon dioxide. But the process of decay consumes more oxygen than they give off. There have been documented cases of eutrophication events in coastal waters in the ocean after heavy spring rains around the world, which cause large amounts of nutrients to be washed into the sea. In fact, dead zones now appear annually, predictably, and routinely in the Gulf of Mexico near the mouth of the Mississippi River, which drains most of the Midwestern agricultural belt. Nutrient pollution also contributes to the decline of coral reefs, which are the most ecologically diverse marine ecosystems, just as rainforests are for terrestrial ecosystems. Clearly, nutrient pollution is now a global problem with the expansion of industrial agricultural methods and technologies. The use of excessive amounts of artificial fertilizers in agriculture is its primary cause. Essentially, our reliance on artificial fertilizers is overtaxing the nitrogen cycle, leading to an increase in the amount of nitrogen compounds in the biosphere well beyond their optimum range. Lake Winnipeg, just north of where I live, is now listed as one of the most endangered bodies of water in the world as a consequence. Why? Because much of the agricultural land to the west and south drains into it up the Red and Assiniboine rivers. Of course, an intergovernmental panel has been formed to discuss what can be done about the issue. But don't expect any action anytime soon, despite the fact the solution is obvious. Namely, legislative return to organic agriculture or traditional farming methods, which used animal wastes as a natural fertilizer, along with nitrogen-fixing crops such as clover, which were necessary to feed the livestock in a mixed farming system, unlike what we have today. But don't expect to hear about that in the corporate media anytime soon. You see, the manufacture and sale of nutrient pollution is a multi-billion-dollar industry annually on an international scale, and banning it would lead to a worrying decline in economic growth. Pollution, you see, is once again incredibly profitable. Cheers.